welcome back here to the Pain and Panic podcast, a fantasy football special. In this episode, I'm Adam Sheets, joined by fantasy football expert and my co-host, Chris Reynolds. Chris, you kind of mentioned in our last episode you really love fantasy football. I'll take you behind the scenes a little bit. Chris, I let him make the entire rundown by himself. I'm going to let him go off on whatever he wants, and I'm sure he's going to have some fun. So, Chris, I'm just going to let you talk. How excited are you for this episode?
This is by far the most excited I've been because, I know football, I love football, and it's great. But fantasy football is just even more fun. It makes you care throughout the whole season when your team's 4-10 and you're like, oh, season's over, but it's not because there's fantasy football to save the day. And I just love it. And it lets me care about players all over the league. And I think I'm more of a fantasy expert than even a football expert. So I'm very happy.
Do you ever get caught in the situation where, you have, let's say, since you're a Saints fan, you have Bucky Irving, so, what's the feeling like when he scores, 3 touchdowns, but, the Saints are losing?
Yeah, no, that's a tough situation to be in. I would think a general rule for me is not to draft teams in the division, which is really easy with the Panthers and the Falcons usually, but usually the Bucks sometimes. But I will say it is easier when your team is bad because you can just accept it, But I think partially you want to just have fun in fantasy football. So if you're going to hate watching your opponents go off twice a year, then just don't draft them, But that's just however you want to space it, because sometimes it can make a loss not as bad, or it could, make it where you lose either way. What happens?
And the flip side of this, there's some people that refuse to draft players on their own team because, they don't want to have to sit there and be like, let's say you're a Bills fan and Josh Allen runs in a touchdown. It's like, oh, let's go. But that's like, wait, I'm playing against Josh Allen. Or even worse, I have Dalton Kincaid and I just lost a touchdown. He got us all the way to the 1.
Yeah. No, it's important to space it out. We don't want to draft everyone in your own team because then you're really doubling down, but it's fun. I think it's interesting how you want to play it. With my team in particular, because they're so bad, I usually just stay away from them. So I'm interested. But I think also, the recent years, I think last year was an all-time fantasy season. So I'm very excited for this upcoming one.
Yeah, I think drafting the full Bengals would be a fun time to have last year. Drafting the full, Jags or Saints for people like us probably wouldn't have been a fun season. But we're going to move into our first topic of the day. Lessons learned from last season, Chris. Sarah's going to start. So I believe you have about 4 lessons that people could have learned from last season that brings them into this season. So where would you like to start here, Chris?
Well, 4 lessons from last season in fantasy football. Number 1, follow the Bengals blueprint of drafting a team that has a great offense and a terrible defense, particularly a good QB. Number 2 is to draft players on good teams rather than great players on bad teams. Number 3 is running backs that, they stayed pretty healthy last season, but don't get used to it. Be careful. And number 4, don't be tricked by rookies. Now, going to number 1, follow the Bengals blueprint. Last season, if you drafted Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, and Ja'Marr Chase, you would have won your league. And I think that's why I have to look at what made that team so successful. They had a really good QB, really good talent, skill position, but they had no defense. So I think when you look at teams this season that have one of the better offenses and worse defenses, once again at the top is the Bengals. Joe Burrow, Ja'Marr Chase, T. Higgins, go for those guys. I know Burrow has some injury concerns, and I think that's valid, but it's pretty easy to find a solid backup quarterback. But I would get definitely one of those guys if you can on the Bengals. Other teams that meet that criteria of good offense, bad defense, I think the Raiders this year, since their defense is really bad, but they now have a quarterback with Geno Smith that can throw the ball, that will help. Brock Bowers, Ashton Genty, Jacoby Myers. The Commanders, magical season last year, and their defense never really was, the reason why they were winning. It was always their offense. The 49ers should be an improved defense, but still last season their defense was struggling, and it was their offense that had to do a lot more passing. The Buccaneers, they have a decent enough defense because of the competition, but when they play good teams, they get into some real shootouts. And then I have the Cardinals as that last team that has a bad defense and a good offense. And 2 question marks are the Vikings and the Falcons, because we don't know if their offense is going to be that great yet. But just one more time from the top: Bengals, Raiders, Commanders, Niners, Buccaneers, Cardinals. Stick to those teams. Those are the guaranteed good offenses, bad defense, as long as no major injuries happen.
Now, one team I kind of want to add to that list and see where you have them is a team that It kind of, their defense isn't bad, but I don't think they're elite, especially when they're missing some pieces, and they're a team that can't run the ball. So where would you have a team like the Cowboys? Because you look at Dak Prescott, they're a team that's probably going to have to throw the football. They have two weapons now, CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens, and you think if the defense, well, you don't know what's going to happen with Micah. They play in an offensive division with Washington and Philadelphia where they can score a lot of points. So do you see maybe the Cowboys, if maybe they're struggling, have to play from behind, maybe it's not the whole bad defense, but it's an okay defense versus an offense that's going to have to throw the football just because they can't run it?
I really think for the Cowboys, I would buy into CeeDee Lamb and maybe George Pickens, but I would not go all in on them like I would the Bengals, just because, like you said, their division, I think it's going to be great when you're against the Commanders or the Giants, but they're going to play the Eagles twice, which is brutal. And the Cowboys do just have bad games, and Dak is coming off an injured season, so I think they have more questions with their offense, which I think is a little bit more scary, but I do think they're a team that could fit in this tier. They're probably in that next tier of teams, but I feel like you look at like the Cardinals, for example. You know that defense isn't good. They play in a good but not great division, but they should be losing a lot of those games. Whereas the Cowboys, they might be playing the Giants, but they're probably going to be winning by a lot, you know? So they're probably not going to throw the ball as much, and I don't want anything to do with that Dallas backfield because who really knows who's starting for them?
Yeah, I think it's just one of those where if you believe, Dak can maybe have a year he had a couple years ago when they weren't very good, but he threw for like 5,000 yards or whatever because they just threw every time they snapped the football. He's thrown like 40 times a game. I think there's some upside there. And I'm not saying draft Dak as one of the top quarterbacks, but it's one of those where if you look at the Cowboys, you're like, yeah, maybe they're just going to throw it every play. You can take some risks on some of those guys. But now kind of moving on to your second topic, and I'll let you elaborate here. Drafting players that are on good teams rather than great players on bad teams was your second idea for people to learn from last season.
Yeah, this is the Michael Pittman effect, as I call it. He's a very good receiver, and he'll be open 5 yards down the field, and Anthony Richardson cannot hit him. And there's nothing more frustrating than watching your guy do the right thing, but he's in a situation where they can't succeed. You do see the best of the best rise above these situations sometimes, but sometimes they don't. Brock Bowers last year did not have a competent QB, and he still had a great season. But then I had Olave a lot of years as well, and Olave had usually the backup of Derek Carr when he got hurt, throwing to him, and you have Spencer Rattler unable to throw him a football. I don't want Tyler Shuck throwing to Chris Olave either. So I think there's a lot of players like that where I'd just be worried of, whereas a guy who's good but not great on a really good offensive team gets elevated. Mike Gesicki, I think, is a very solid pass-catching tight end. On the Bengals, he goes way up there. I think on the Cardinals, too, there's Michael Wilson, who's like one of their other receivers. He actually always seems to have a pretty good year, even though he's not like a star receiver.
Yeah, and I think another guy, just kind of, give maybe an example here and see where you would rank him would be a guy, because he got off to a great start last year, then had some injuries. Where would you put a guy like Malik Neighbors in this conversation, with, now he has Russell Wilson, Jameis Winston, Jackson Dart, whoever's throwing the ball, but when he was on the field last year, he was on his way to potentially being in the Rookie of the Year conversation. Brian Thomas Jr. was another guy that, was really good on a bad team last season as well. So where would you put, I think, Jags are going to have some improvement this season, but where do you think Malik Neighbors might be in that conversation? Maybe being an exception, or again, just maybe a little bit of a risk with how bad the Giants might be?
Yeah, I mean, the exceptions are out there. I think for a guy like Neighbors, he's still young in New York. I tend to do a lot of drafts in New York, so I do not touch Malik Neighbors because he's going to go really early, and I think it's risky to draft a really young receiver when you don't know who's going to be the starting quarterback. One of them is a rookie, the other one's old and looks kind of washed, and the other one is Jameis Winston, who could light up the field, but also throw it to the wrong team. So a guy like that, I would just lower in my ranking for most people who would then like him more. So I feel like with those guys, if you could get them late, then it might be worth taking the swing. But a lot of these top guys that are just on bad teams, you don't really want to take a swing on. And even a team like the Seahawks are like a solid team, but Sam Darnold, who really knows? Do you really want to draft Jackson Smith-Njigba? I think he's really a talented receiver, but you're buying into Darnold on a Seahawks team that likes to run the ball, and it's a very talented person, but it's a young receiver still, and I think people like him a lot, so people see the potential, but I think too many times we get excited about the guys on bad teams, but we just know the name, and they're fun and exciting.
Another guy that fits in there, Stephon Diggs. Now, of course, the number one receiver
Yeah.
in New England. Where would you have him? Because, when we talked about the AFC East, we kind of thought the Patriots might be better this year. And I think Drake May's a big part of that. So would you take a risk on a guy like Stephon Diggs coming off the serious injury? Now, of course, he's really the only weapon that Drake May's going to have up there.
Yeah, I think Diggs, you might be able to get him for cheap because he is coming off an injury. And I think a lot of people have been burnt by Diggs in the past. So I think a lot of them, he might not be as hot of a name as he was, 2-3 years ago when he was on the Bills, for example. I just think everything you look at, if you see most rankings and there's someone that's on a bad team, in my head, I would just lower them 10 spots from where they're actually ranked. So if Diggs is ranked 60th overall, in my head, I want to take him till 70th or 75th and just lower those guys, whereas guys on the really good teams probably bump them up a little bit. T. Higgins probably, if he was on a bad team, would probably be 20 spots lower than he was last year.
Well, you never know. Depends on the situation.
T. Higgins on the Steelers is probably a very different fantasy production than T. Higgins on the Bengals.
Well, yeah, T. Higgins is on a fantasy football team, with the Bengals instead of being because, like I said, you could have a really good team that scores 27 points a game and finishes 5-12. Because they have no defense. So, that would be an example, maybe a player on a bad team that would actually maybe help you. But now we'll move to the third lesson you said we could have learned from last year, running backs. You mentioned they stayed healthy last year. Of course, we had an all-time running back season last season from a lot of those guys. Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley. So you're saying be a little hesitant with these guys? And they weren't all healthy. Christian McCaffrey, of course, the 1-1 in a lot of leagues, barely played last season.
Yeah, I think, for years, the rule in fantasy was to take running backs early. That's when I was little and I was going to fantasy drafts with my mom. And I was like, they always get hurt. And I was, then I started drafting receivers. And I feel like it kind of swung in the direction of receivers. I think, though, there's a lot of good running backs now. And I think we're seeing a lot more running backs taken again in the first round. And last year, Jahmyr Gibbs stayed healthy. Saquon stayed healthy. Derrick Henry stayed healthy. Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry were both also later in the first round or the second round last season. They weren't really the top ones. So I think people are like, oh, they're healthy. But if you told me a few years ago we're drafting a 28-year-old or a 31-year-old running back with the first pick, that would be crazy. So I think we need to find some balance there. I think some people that are going to get, oh, they're healthy and they have this false hope of health when last year was one of the most healthy running back classes we've seen, besides Christian McCaffrey, who might have been the ultimate blow-up of that. But besides him, it was a pretty healthy running back year, especially from the older guys, which usually isn't the case.
Yeah, and I think one thing, there's guys, obviously, that you definitely have to red flag us to come up. Kenneth Walker's a guy that always comes to mind. He seems to always be hurt up in Seattle, but they have a good running back room. Same with McCaffrey. It's like if you're going to draft McCaffrey, you might want to draft some of the other running backs in that room because the Shanahan system is just going to keep funneling through. Where would you have a guy, this is a running back here that has been, for the most part, healthy. He's been productive, but a lot of people really don't talk about him, and then it's kind of like a guy in the 4th or 5th round, like, oh, hey, that's a good pick. Where would you put a guy like James Conner on a Cardinals team where he's been productive and he scores a lot of touchdowns?
James Conner might be the ultimate boring guy in fantasy football who actually puts up real points. I think his name is boring. I think he plays on the worst team in that division, which the Cardinals, I think, are a good team, just they usually are in that really tough division. So people think, no one's really watching the Cardinals like they are some of these other teams, and I think he goes unnoticed. And in Pittsburgh, they let him go, and they didn't want him. So people, I think, were kind of out on James Conner. But if you look at him, he's been very consistent. I think if he's there late, I would just easily snag him. He's a very good running back 2, or if he's your backup, you're looking amazing at the running back position. But I think he's a very good running back 2. I think you just have to look for the guys who maybe if they're not coming off a major injury, but if they're older, I think that's fine. And I think the way to balance that is, like you said, draft the handcuff, the guy that's their backup in case something happens. And they're really only valuable to you because no one really wants the backup on their own.
And the last running backs we'll talk about here. What do you do with a team like Detroit, who has really good running backs, but they got 2 of them? So it's kind of like, do you have to draft both Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery in that type of situation? Or do you draft one and then you're kind of playing the week where you just hope it's their week where they're getting the touches?
The Lions might be the only team in the NFL that can fully support 2 running backs in fantasy. I think early on, and with Jahmyr Gibbs, his rookie season, it was more of a this guy or that guy. But last year we saw when healthy, they were both the 1-2 punch. But I think Gibbs has taken over as the running back one, and Montgomery did get hurt last season, and he's older. So I think Gibbs is clearly the running back one. He's the guy to get. But Montgomery is either by far the best handcuff, or even on his own, he gets a lot of touches. He gets a lot of the goal line work, and he can catch passes too. That's not mostly him, but he's a very good running back too. I don't think you can rely on Montgomery as much as you did the last 2 seasons, but he's still a viable fantasy option. And I think, though, he will probably be discounted because he is coming off an injury and Jahmyr Gibbs is so hot right now in fantasy.
Yeah, and I think one thing, kind of like, let's say our listeners are sitting there in their draft and they're trying to figure out who would you take in this type of situation where you have David Montgomery on the board, and then the other guy's a guy like, let's say it's Joe Mixon, who is on a team where he's the number one running back. There's really no number two that's pushing him, but at the same time, weak offensive line. Joe Mixon's been hurt in camp. Like, who are you drafting in that situation? Will you take David Montgomery as goal line situations he's getting the ball, or are you going to flip and say, all right, I'm just going to take Joe Mixon because I know he's getting the ball every game?
I think you would still take Montgomery in that situation, which might be surprising, but when he gets the ball, great things seem to happen. Mixon's very good, but guys like that are older on those teams that don't have an offensive line, it's really hit or miss depending on their strength of schedule, whereas Montgomery, no matter who they play, he's getting the ball because the Lions like to run it. And I think that's the kind of guy that you'd rather have, as someone who's consistently getting touches and getting points. And he's not getting 5 points a game. It's more like 12 points a game, up to 20 points a game, depending on if he has a touchdown. And also considering if anything happens to Gibbs, Montgomery would become a top-tier fantasy running back.
Now, would it change your mind, though, if, let's say, now you obviously don't know this in the draft, but the offensive line's weak for Houston, so what if it's like Joe Mixon might have to catch 7 balls a game? Would that then, change your opinion there? Because he's going to get Montgomery doesn't get catches because when pass plays, Gibbs is usually out there running the routes.
I think we all get really obsessive over this PPR thing where you get points per reception, and it's a nice little few extra things. I had Alvin Kamara last season, and it was great because even if he had no yards, no touchdowns, he still had 10 points from catches. But I think those kind of tend to fluctuate a lot, or sometimes it is 10, other times it might be 4, and they try to run the ball more. And I don't think teams want to do little checkdowns to that. If you have CJ Stroud, you're not going to want him just do a bunch of dump offs. They're nice occasionally, but I want to get too focused on that because you see even guys like Derrick Henry, he's not a pass-catching running back, but he can still catch the ball occasionally. In some games, he might have 4 catches, and he's in that same level. So I want to get too caught up in points per reception. The only guy that's really, really transcended the game in that respect has been Alvin Kamara because the QB situation in New Orleans is either really bad or Drew Brees, who was great, but really had no arm strength left at the end of his career.
I remember Austin Eckler was insanely good at never having any rushing yards, but having like 10 catches a game.
He was that, and then he fell apart. And that's, one of the issues is when you're getting those checkdowns, you're catching it, and then you're getting lit up if the ball's not in the right spot.
Yeah, those guys get old quick sometimes, so that's always a big issue. But now we're going to switch on to your 4th lesson here, not being tricked by rookies, which I think is interesting because the last few years we've had some big rookie seasons to talk about.
That's exactly my point, Adam. I would not take a big swing on a rookie in the first 4 rounds. Last season, Brian Thomas Jr., you could have gotten him pretty late, compared to Marvin Harrison. If you drafted Marvin Harrison, you probably didn't make the playoffs because he was going to be one of your top few picks, and he honestly didn't. He was very inconsistent, wasn't great. Brian Thomas had an amazing first season, and by the end of the season, he was kicking a full gear with Mac Jones as the quarterback, and he won me one of my leagues. So I think with rookies, they usually tend to come along late in the season. So you kind of have to, put that into your math in your head of, okay, can I win these early weeks without this running back contributing? Jahmyr Gibbs, his rookie season, nothing in the beginning of the year. People were freaking out. By the end of the season, he was great, but you probably missed the playoffs. But it's all about where you take those risks. So with rookies, I think the ones you should avoid, Travis Hunter, who's a very big name, an incredible player, but who knows how much offensive snaps he's going to get. It's a very big risk for someone who's a very big name and probably going to get taken early. Another one is Omarion Hampton, a Chargers running back. Harbaugh likes to have a backfield where they split reps. They really like Najee Harris, who's there. I think Omarion Hampton by the end of the season will be great, but I think they're going to try to give the ball to Najee Harris a lot early in the year. McMillan, the Panthers' first-round pick, He's a rookie, and he's with Bryce Young at quarterback. Who really knows that team's going to really be that good offensively? I have some doubts. I wouldn't bank on a rookie with Bryce Young having an amazing rookie season. And the last one I have here, who I really like as a player, is RJ Harvey, the Browns running back. We're recording this in early August, and right now he's 5th on the depth chart. I'm sure he'll be, contributing at the start of the season, but Sean Payton, he likes to use a lot of running backs. He likes to have pass-catching running backs, but they do have a loaded backfield right now, and who knows how much they want to start a rookie running back, which sometimes could take a while. And the last guy here is Emeka Egbuka, the Buccaneers' first-round pick. They have Mike Evans. They have Chris Godwin already. They drafted McMillan last year as well, so now it's the 4th receiver. So it's a loaded room, and he's a very good receiver, but who knows how much he's going to see the field. Do you really think Baker Mayfield is going to rather throw it to him than Mike Evans or Chris Godwin, who he's been playing with for years? I don't know.
I mean, if he's open, he's going to throw him the ball, I'm sure. I don't think he's going to look
Sure.
him off. But now what about some guys, because they're not even the top rookies I would have. The top 2 rookies I would have I'm looking to draft would be, first of all, Ashton Jeanty, of course, the running back, try to take him in Vegas, and then the other guy, to me, would be a guy like Tyler Warren in Indianapolis when he's the only tight end there. And you look at the tight end depth isn't very big, so you might not have to take Warren early, and he's a guy you could potentially take a risk on as well because, again, talking about what you're hearing from Indianapolis, they want to use Warren in a lot of different ways, and we are recording this on August 7th, so we don't know of anything that happens maybe in the preseason that could change any of this stuff, but, that's something as well. I think those 2 guys would you maybe be more generous to take a risk on those guys, especially Jeanty, because Jeanty's going in the first 2 rounds of every fantasy draft this season.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tyler Warren's a great example of a rookie you could take late. I don't think he's going very early in drafts, so I think once you get in the later rounds, take those swings, draft some rookies because they can win you the league and they're going to be pretty cheap. Jeanty is the only one, the only early running back I did not put in the do not draft list because he was so special at college. Saquon was great coming out of college, and I think they had a lot of checkdowns because they couldn't actually throw the ball that year. So it's really tough to try to pick which rookie is actually going to really contribute. Jamar Chase, his rookie season, people were saying he's having trouble catching the ball. He had a lot of drops. He fell in drafts, and then he was amazing that year. So it's tough to really decide who's going to be that one. If I had to pick a rookie that's going to be good, that's going to be picked early, I think Jeanty is the safest bet. However, is he really that much better than Jonathan Taylor his first season? And right now, Jeanty is going a lot higher. And he's on a Raiders team with a bad offensive line that's probably going to be trailing a lot of games. And Geno Smith in the Raiders like to run the ball, but if they're losing, who knows what that's going to look like. So I think rookies are fun. They're exciting. They tend to go early. I think take a swing at a rookie after the 5th round on, 4th round on even. Maybe take the swing. But early on, get the guys that are going to day in, day out contribute. Injuries, it's going to be hard to predict. But I'm assuming they're healthy. Then, I'd probably pick the guy that's more established. Because sometimes these guys bust and sometimes they're just not in the right situation. But we don't know compared to guys that we've seen for a few years.
Yeah, that's fair. I think there's a good way to put it. Now, you also had on here, now looking at a rundown, you also said some non-rookies that you think you should probably be avoiding as well. So, who are you avoiding that's not a rookie that maybe you do end up taking a rookie over one of these guys?
Yeah, no, these are the guys that I just was saying guys not to draft your rookies. And I'm like, you know what? I don't think, no matter what pick it is, I don't think I'd ever actually like having these players on my team. So number one, Jalen Waddle. He was a very popular name 2 seasons ago. Him and Tyreek were running all over the field. But last season, he had 4 games in double digits. He was known as this boomer bust per game guy, but he's not really booming. He's kind of just busting with very few outliers. And those outliers were like 12 points a game. So it's not like he's really lighting up anymore, and his production completely relies on Tua's health, which has never been anything of a guarantee. He's the 2nd best receiver in Miami, and I feel like they might blow it up. So I would not draft him. He's another guy that people like because he's fast. He's going to get big plays, but that really hasn't been the case the last year or 2. Next, we have anyone on the Saints. I love them. Chris Olave's injury prone. Rashid Shaheed's coming off an injury, and I don't think Tyler Shuck's going to be chucking it deep to him. And Alvin Kamara, I think, is, has one of the highest floors in fantasy because of the pass catching he has at running back. But one of the worst feelings is you're in the fantasy playoffs. This guy's a great season, but his team is 4 games out, no chance of making it, and they bench him because they don't want to get him hurt. Happened to me last year with Kamara, and then you're trying to pick up some random running back at the very end of the season, and there's not going to be a lot left. So pick guys who are going to be playing, in weeks 15, 16, and 17, and 18. No one's usually not doing the fantasy playoffs anyways. Next after that, Michael Pittman, I talked about. Great guy, bad team. He needs a better fit. Cooper Kupp, I had him last year in a lot of leagues, and he was great in the beginning, but injury prone on a new team, and the Rams kind of seemed like they were happy to let him leave. And last one, Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts has never been fun to have in fantasy football. Maybe his rookie season, he was a little disappointing, but he had 1,000 yards. Like, you know what? He actually had a very good season for a rookie tight end. Every year since, he's been the most frustrating player in fantasy football. I cannot remember a player who more people have had and been disappointed by than Kyle Pitts. It is not like his seasons are terrible. They're just never what you expect from a guy who was drafted super early for a tight end in his actual draft. And then fantasy football is getting drafted so early based on his potential, but he hasn't really shown any flashes of getting there. And because the QE situation was so bad and it slightly improves, you have hope. And it just never actually gets there. Michael Penix, he says he wants to get the ball to Kyle Pitts. I'm not doing it. I am just not buying into it anymore. And I know it's going to be the 8th round. I'm going to see Kyle Pitts' name. No one's picking him, and I'm going to want to do it. Don't do it. It only leads you pain and suffering. I'd rather have someone who I know is bad than someone who's okay, but I thought was going to be great. Just emotionally, it hurts so much more.
Nah, man, I'll tell you. I might take Kyle Pitts. I'll tell you now, the power of golfing with your quarterback, you don't understand. They're riding in the golf cart together. They're maybe sharing a brewski here and there, talking a little bit. They hit a nice drive. That stuff's important to me. Penix is lefty, so, he's staying on the wrong side of the ball. Maybe a little joke from Kyle Pitts as well. They seem to have good chemistry. I think, you don't obviously draft Kyle Pitts high, but again, the tight end depth is just not there in a lot of situations. So maybe, like you said, if you're in the 9th round, it's like you need a tight end. And let's say, all your big name guys like your McBrides, maybe Warren's off the board, Bowers is off the board definitely by that point. Even Kelsey being off the board at that point, I could see maybe saying, you know what, there's no real good tight ends. I need one. Might as well just take Kyle Pitts and see what happens. It'd be a little hard on the guy. He hasn't been horrible. He's not great, but he hasn't been horrible.
He hasn't been horrible, but based on everyone's expectations, which aren't his fault, but based on his expectations, he's the most frustrating player to have. And play fantasy football to have fun. You will not have fun by drafting Kyle Pitts, and we can move on from him. I'm tired of talking about him every year as the most disappointing fantasy player in the history of the league.
Yeah, so now we'll move to some boomer bust players. There's obviously every time you get to these drafts, you go to who are you going to draft? It's going to be high boom, high bust potential. So what are you thinking here with your some boomer bust picks?
Yeah, most of these guys are big names. They just either have an injury concern or a question about their team. First guy I have in there, Christian McCaffrey. He, when healthy, is the best fantasy player in the history of fantasy football. However, last season he got hurt, and we remembered why we were afraid to draft him 2 years ago when he won everyone their league. If you want to ride that roller coaster, be my guest. I just think when he keeps getting picked higher as these things go along. People see the name, they buy into the upside. There's always going to be one person out of 10 that's going to be super high on him. I wouldn't be that person. I would probably think if he falls to the 2nd round, definitely snag him. But with your 1st round pick, you really have to hit on that pick. Because if you don't, then you're just playing catch up the whole season, and someone else is going to have someone who's kicking butt and having this top tier guy while you're having a guy on your IR spot. So McCaffrey, number 1, he kind of owns the boomer bust level. Also on there, Tyreek Hill. I think people have lowered their expectations a little bit, but 2 seasons ago, he was one of the best players in fantasy. When Tua was healthy, they were running all over the field. He's still a really big name. He also relies on Tua's health, and he's another one who, when things aren't right, he's kind of a disaster to have on your team. Next, we talked about him already, Ashton Jeanty. We already dived into why he's a big question mark, but he was so good in college. There's a lot of potential there. Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley, you're thinking, well, he's always good. And he is, but he does have injury questions, which were a concern going into last year. Now, he was on a way better offensive line, but they ran him hard last year. Multiple games, he was 200 plus yards, and it's great for that season. But this year, I think they know they put a lot of wear and tear in him. They might try to haul him in a little bit back and save him for the playoffs again. Because for him, there's no regular season that he could have that was better than last year, honestly. It would be either the same or something, just it's going to be really hard to replicate that. So I think you're buying Saquon at his all-time high, when in reality, he's still a somewhat injury-prone player coming off of his heaviest workload season. I don't know what you think about that.
I mean, I think he's going to have over 1,500 yards, and that would be a step back. I think he's going to take a step back, but it's still going to be 1,500 yards. And I think he's actually going to have more touchdowns this year because I think they're going to have to start practicing not using the tush push because this is going to be their last season to use it. So that can go one of two ways. They're either going to overuse it like crazy, or they're going to say, how about we start practicing some of these goal line plays that don't involve us just all lining up, in a packed situation and just shoving Jalen Hurts into the end zone. So, I think maybe he's going to get more touchdowns this year as well because he barely had double-digit touchdowns last season because Jalen Hurts kept stealing all his touchdowns.
I will say having Saquon last year was great some weeks, but some weeks it was bad because he'd have 150 yards with 0 touchdowns because he'd run to the one, and then Jalen Hurts gets shoves in. So
it's still 15 points.
True, but he could have gotten even more, which is crazy to think about. Next thing up on here, Justin Jefferson. He was a boomer bust guy last year, and he pretty much boomed with Sam Darnold. That was a huge question if Sam Darnold could actually spark that offense, and he did. Now you got J.J. McCarthy coming off of a major injury. He missed all of last season. It's his first NFL season now, actually playing the games. Who really knows with him? I think you could still take Justin Jefferson, but I would probably lower him maybe 3 spots than you would have otherwise if he was still with Sam Darnold. But if J.J. McCarthy's good, then Justin Jefferson, take him easily, and he could win you a league. But I don't know how much the Vikings are going to want to just chuck out J.J. McCarthy and say chuck it deep to Justin Jefferson because a lot of rookie QBs, they don't want throwing the ball that much anyways.
Yeah, but I think the one thing, this goes back to our NFC North podcast when Chris was, borderline getting to second base with Kevin O'Connell with the way he was talking. And, now we're getting to where you don't think he can develop J.J. McCarthy into just Justin Jefferson's going to be open. So just hit him when he's open. I trust Jettas. I mean, because you just said, do you really trust Justin Jefferson? Maybe there's some concern now that Sam Darnold's not there. Well, it's Sam Darnold. It's not like he lost, Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen. He lost Sam Darnold, and I think that was more of a factor of the system. So I think, it
was
JJ's
a factor
of
the system. It was a factor of the system, but Sam Darnold statistically had an amazing season.
Yeah, so J.J. McCarthy can't run the system?
I think doing it to the output that Sam Darnold did would be difficult, just because he's basically a rookie QB, but Jefferson will be good. I think he's going around 4th in a lot of drafts or 5th. I'd probably bring him back to around 10 or 8. I wouldn't take him any earlier than that because there are some guys that are just more of a guaranteed guy than him. And last one, Devon Achane. I still don't know how to say his name. I hear it differently every single game. But the point is, 2 years ago, he was electric when he played. He got injured, and there was a major question mark about him last year. And last year, when Tua played, he was great. And when Tua did not play, he was not. He's a great pass-catching back. Another guy, I'm not going to bank every week on Tua's health. That's not a game I'd like to play, and I would not want... I think you get a lot of other running backs that can consistently give you points than someone who might be, 20 or 0, depending on who's the quarterback.
Yeah, I think there's definitely boomer bust there. Not just if Tua's healthy. His big boomer bust is he's a boomer bust running back. He's a guy who have a 60-yard touchdown or he won't do much. He's big on speed. They do have Zach Wilson as the backup now. So, Zach Wilson is not a great quarterback, but if Tua gets hurt, he can check it down to the running back. He's willing to do that. He did that with Breece Hall. Breece Hall's best year was when Zach Wilson was his quarterback. So if you're looking to talk yourself into Devon Achane, that would be your way to do it, that the backup, has performed well with good running backs. But now we'll switch to boomer bust to maybe some guys sleeping on here. Looking at your rundown, I am shaking my head at your first pick because I've never seen a guy like this guy more than you have, so I just don't get it. You can go.
Jakobi Meyers, Adam. That is my guy you're talking about. I think Jakobi Meyers is a great receiver. Not actually great, but he's very good for where he always goes. He's not a big name. He was known most notoriously for not getting a touchdown to start his career for a very long time. But he's now on a Raiders team with a competent quarterback. He was good last year too, but he was a better QB. And yes, they have a good running back and good tight end, but he's their wide receiver 1. And I think if you could get a good wide receiver 1 that late in the draft, you kind of have to jump on that. And I think he's a very good flex option I think Derrick Henry. I'm gonna say Derrick Henry is a sleeper because I was expecting Derrick Henry to come out here and be one of the top 5 picks, and he's not because people say, "Oh, he's a 30-something-year-old running back." He's the only running back I will ever draft this late in his age. I used to be against him, just expecting the cliff to happen. But you know what? He might be the LeBron James of running backs. Derrick Henry is built differently. We see it every week. He stiff arms guys. He runs them over. He's bigger than almost everyone on the defensive anyways. And Lamar Jackson is a very good running quarterback, but he does need to hand the ball off to Derrick Henry a lot because Derrick Henry is so much bigger. He can take those hits at the goal line. He's basically a goal line back. Plus, he's fast, so he can actually rack up the yards. Not a great catcher, but he has caught in some balls more than he did early in his career. So I think Derrick Henry's still, honestly, a top 5 running back. Just he's not young. He doesn't have the upside because we've already seen him at his best. But his best wins you leagues. It has multiple times in the past. Stop expecting this guy to fall off because he has shown no signs of it.
Yeah, I think he's going to be good. I wouldn't call him a sleeper. Maybe that's just on what other people are trying to talk themselves out of taking him because of stuff. Maybe that's why he would be a sleeper. But nah, he's really good. Only thing that would concern me, you mentioned the age, also maybe the Ravens try to change some things up. Maybe they kind of do what the Chiefs did 2 years ago, use the regular season more as let's try this, let's try that, because what we're doing in the regular season right now isn't working, and maybe that means less carries for Derrick Henry. But no, I think he's obviously a great pick. Absolutely, you said top 5 running back. I mean, I think that's a no-brainer there as well.
Yeah, I think people are buying into the upside of a Bijan Robinson rather than just knowing that you're going to get a bona fide star in Derrick Henry, and not like a major sleeper, but like, oh, I'm surprised he's still here with the 10th pick. Next guy, Bucky Irving on the Bucks. He's their real running back one. He emerges at the end of last season. Kind of people weren't really focused on the Bucks running game as much as their passing game, but he had a great end. Next guy I have Trey McBride on the Cardinals. He was the second best tight end, and he only had 3 touchdowns last year, and they all happened at the very end of the year. But every week, 20 points with no touchdowns. Imagine if he actually has some touchdowns. Touchdowns tend to vary a lot. So I think now they're trying to get him the ball. They try to get him the ball in the end zone because they thought it was kind of funny that he didn't have one. They wanted to get him some touchdowns, which was great during the fantasy playoffs. I would bank on him again having a great year because he doesn't even rely on the touchdowns like Sam Laporta did a few seasons ago. Next guy, Brock Purdy, quarterback on the Niners. I think people just want to say that he's not that talented because he's the last pick and they don't want to buy into it. Every year that man is like the 10th best quarterback in the league and no one really accepts it. But guess what? He still puts up fantasy points consistently because there's so much talent around him. And last guy, James Conner. We talked about him. So boring. Good fantasy player, though. Good running back. Usually is he's on the field a lot. Kind of an Iron Man in that regard. He missed a game last year, barely played, but still, he's always trying to be on the field, which is rare for a running back because they tend to always be dinged up and miss some games.
Now, some other sleepers, and this would maybe be just because of other situations, but we have holdouts in the NFL right now, like Terry McLaurin's not playing. Jawan Jennings hasn't reported yet. He's holding out. So, as of we're recording this on August 7th, so again, when this is posted, a lot could change. But, how would you value maybe if you're doing a draft, and let's say you're doing it and Terry McLaurin still hasn't showed up, would you take him, in the 5th, 6th, 7th round, or do you continue to let him slide just because you don't know what's going to happen with maybe holdouts in this situation?
No, I think those are guys to target because people do get afraid. We don't have a lot of NFL players actually sitting out the season because they want a new contract, because the moment they start not getting paid because they're missing games, they give in. That happens every year, but during your draft, you get scared. I remember once Alvin Kamara needed a new contract. I didn't want any piece of it. Then, right before the season, gets the contract, has his best season ever statistically. So I think, and those guys too are in their contract years. They want to prove it. They want to be worth the money. And I think those contract years or right after the contract are usually good. It's usually once they're long-term financially secured, you might see whatever. But Jamar Chase and T. Higgins playing for a contract last year. Jamar Chase just got that contract extension now, but going into the season, he wasn't wasn't during the preseason stuff. People were afraid he missed week 1, and then he won the Triple Crown. Don't be worried by it. Once these players start missing money, they end up showing up no matter what. So I wouldn't be too worried about that. It happens every year, and I think I learned that too. Just trust that they're going to show up because they always do.
All right, now we'll move into the you tiered the players here, so we'll start with quarterbacks. Who are your top tier quarterbacks heading into this season for fantasy?
Yeah, I think every year there should be that top tier of guys that no matter what, you just feel confident in. There's no question marks around them. And I think for the quarterback position, if you don't get one of these top quarterbacks, you might as well wait until you get to Jared Goff, Brock Purdy, Geno Smith, because they're all going to be similar. And it's crazy to think that Patrick Mahomes, is statistically similar to those guys, but he kind of is during the regular season, at least. Obviously, he's a better quarterback. But I'm just saying, for fantasy purposes, the only quarterbacks you should actually take early are Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Jaden Daniels, and Joe Burrow. Now, all of them could run. 4 out of the 5 that I just listed can run the ball. Everyone except Joe Burrow. He can't, but because we mentioned his team's always throwing the ball, he's the only real pass-first quarterback that I would take this early. Everyone else, you're banking to the running upside because rushing is worth so much more than throwing. But all those guys get rushing touchdowns. They get some yards in there. And no one else, like a Brock Purdy, can't compete with that. Even Patrick Mahomes, when he's not running and he's not letting up the field anymore with Tyreek Hill, then they're just, solid QB plays.
Yeah, I think, fantasy kind of maybe it skews people a lot of times on like who they think are actually good quarterbacks. But yeah, I think you're right. I think those are your top 5. I would be a little concerned about Joe Burrow just on the fact that I would not be surprised if first of all, it's hard to have that season back-to-back years. And second thing is maybe they try to take the ball out of his hands a little bit, just try to run the ball, try to allow the defense, kind of play a little more complimentary, maybe allow the defense, give him a chance. But I'd be the only one I'd be concerned with. Also, with Jalen Hurts, obviously, you also have concern with, what happens if they don't get down to the 1-yard line? Because a lot of his stuff is off 1-yard quarterback sneaks.
I will believe it when I see it. I am done trying to predict the Eagles will not do the tush push because they do it all the time. And he will just have a game. He gets 3 rushing touchdowns and he has a terrible actual passing game. That's 18 points of just 1-yard rushing touchdowns. I think Jalen Hurts is a lock for a top 3 fantasy season because he's so consistent. He has the highest floor, I think, of any quarterback. Honestly, him or Lamar with how much running they do. Josh Allen's probably the best in terms of the passing and the rush with the passing side and rushing, whereas Lamar, really his rushing game, especially the yardage, is just so absurd. And Joe Burrow, I think, is fair. It's hard to duplicate that, but he's the only, non-mobile QB that I would take just out of respect for what he did last season.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think he's definitely in that category. I think that'd be the one thing to fear. The one thing with Jalen Hurts is that I'm assuming you saw the stat where Saquon Barkley was tackled at the 1-yard line like 13 times. They said, so if he rushes those in, he breaks the rushing touchdown record, and he probably solidifies himself as the MVP of the league. So it's a weird thing to look at that consistently happens in Philadelphia, that the running backs always seem to go down at the 1.
DeAndre Swift had to happen to him a bunch. Miles Sanders did too. And instead of just banking on the luck of it, I'm just going to think that it's just how the Eagles play. And I'm just not going to question it. I'm just going to take Jalen Hurts. And then we can move to the next position because we have Saquon at the top of the running back group. I know we talked about he has a lot of wear and tear on him, but he still has to be regarded as the top tier of running backs. Obviously, he could catch a little bit, great runner. And if he has so much upside with his rushing touchdown potential. Next guy, Derrick Henry, we talked about. I'm not going to be scared about his age until he actually shows it. And I only have 2 more guys in that top tier. I think it's Jahmyr Gibbs, because even in that split backfield, he's a monster. And if Montgomery gets hurt, Gibbs has even more potential. And the last guy, Bijan Robinson on the Falcons. The Falcons should be better. They're going to play the Panthers and Saints each twice a year. So I think they're going to be able to run the ball a little bit. They should be a better run team now that they have not Kirk Cousins as the quarterback. And I only have 4 guys there, and I think everyone else you kind of talk yourself into or out of, but those 4 I think have to go above everyone else.
Yeah, I think they're really good. Bijan, of course, is a guy that I think a lot of people, he's not Kyle Pitts, but it's a little bit of we're having high hopes for him. We're waiting to see him get to that match, but he's been really good. I think he deserves to be, especially with Michael Penix. Young quarterbacks usually like to lean on that running back a lot more. Jahmyr Gibbs, of course, it's all dependent on how David Montgomery comes back. New offensive coordinator, so how he's used now as well. But yeah, I think those are your clear top 4. And again, we already talked about Derrick Henry and maybe slight concerns that people might have with him.
Yeah, I think those are all fair, but I think those guys need to go above injury-prone guys like McCaffrey, or a guy like Genty who's a rookie, or Jonathan Taylor who's pretty good and consistent, just not like those bona fide stars that do win you leagues. Next group, we have wide receivers. And I think this is a two people at the very top. I think it's the receivers have a lot of depth. And I think in the top tier, the only two guys I would take, and I would take them first two overall. Ja'Marr Chase, I think, should go number one. And I would have CeeDee Lamb number two, just because receivers do get dinged up a lot, but they tend to not have these major injuries like running backs tend to do. And I think I'd rather have the more likelihood of a full healthy season of a CeeDee Lamb and Ja'Marr Chase over a guy like Saquon. But those two guys, Ja'Marr Chase, we talked about already, won the Triple Crown on a pass-first offense that has a bad defense. And we talked about the Cowboys. CeeDee Lamb's the number one option with Dak Prescott, who's a good passing quarterback. That defense isn't great. And the only concern for CD is if it's like last year, the season falls apart, he missed the playoffs, which was very unfortunate, but he's really good. I think just he's kind of cooled down in our minds because he's not Jefferson or Chase, but he's that tier of NFL player below, but fantasy-wise, he actually might be with them.
Yeah, I think, is it maybe a plus or a minus now that CD has a true number two with him? Because, like, now he has George Pickens, so now it gives Dak another option, especially if they decide to double CD. So does that maybe help him, that maybe they have to pull coverage off of him, or at the same time maybe hurt him because now targets might be slightly more spread out?
I think it helps CD. I think when George Pickens, who's a very good receiver, but I don't think he's really going to demand the ball away from CD. I think George Pickens will want the ball. But I don't think Dak Prescott is going to throw the ball a lot more to this new receiver running a lot of go routes compared to CD, who likes to be more short, running across the field using his speed. George Pickens is usually just running 50 yards down the field and try to be Spider-Man to make a catch, which he could do really well. But I think CeeDee Lamb's game is going to be pretty much unaffected because he's not really colliding with George Pickens. They're very complementary players. I think that fit isn't bad at all. And look at the Bengals. T. Higgins and Ja'Marr Chase were two of the best receivers, and they're on the same team. So I think two is the maximum. Once you get to three guys, that's when you see one guy really start to fall off, though.
Could you try to talk yourself into, and again, we've been talking about the Bengals, could you talk about maybe having T. Higgins as your wide receiver one on your fantasy team and that working out, or do you still think you need to get a one, like let's say it's even if it's like a Brian Thomas Jr., or it's a Malik Neighbors, a Stephon Diggs, or would you rather have maybe a number two on his team, but statistically could be a number one?
I think with T. Higgins, I would definitely have him below the bona fide stars who are receiver ones. You know, he's definitely a few tiers below those guys, but I think he's the best number two receiver. He should be the first receiver taken in your draft who's the number two receiver on his own depth chart. I'd probably have him in a tier of like DK Metcalf, someone like that who's a very good receiver on an iffier team is, I think, the equivalent of a very good wide receiver too. And with the Bengals, we talked about, it's going to be almost impossible to replicate that passing season. But I think no matter what, Ja'Marr Chase is still going to get his touches. Joe Burrow is still going to throw. If I had to guess a guy to have a little bit of a recession, it would be T. Higgins.
And another guy that I don't know if people are sleeping on him, but he's not getting a lot of coverage right now, and a lot of people aren't talking about him. Where would you take a guy like Davante Adams, who's, is now out of New York? He's in a new situation. He's got Sean McVay as his coach now. He's got Matthew Stafford at quarterback. Puka's still there, but, I mean, do you think Davante Adams now, people have kind of been sleeping on, he's kind of struggled the last couple of years, but could he maybe have a resurgent year, kind of like we saw Odell have that when he arrived in LA? Now Davante's actually get a full season of it, potentially.
It is a little tough to judge him because Puka Nacua is a real beast, but he is injury prone. So I think there will be weeks where if Davante's healthy and Puka's not, you could really buy into that upside. However, I am worried of older, amazing receivers who now go to new teams and bounce around more because all of a sudden it's just going to be that they're washed and they're not good. I think Davante's still a good player. I would, though, probably have him definitely below T. Higgins. I think he'd be in that, like, probably 10 picks later than T. Higgins, just because he's on a team that already has a bona fide wide receiver one, and the Rams do like to run the ball a lot with Kyren Williams. And Stafford does have some injury concerns as well, so I think they have a lot of questions. I think from the Rams, you should still get Puka Nacua and Kyren Williams and then the backup for Kyren. But I think Stafford might be a little questionable with his health, and Davante with his health. Puka, I think, is a wide receiver one, like a superstar when he's healthy. Just for him, he would be in the top tier of guys, but he does usually miss 4 games a season with some random injury.
And last guy to talk about here, and there's a couple guys maybe in a similar situation, but what would you do with a guy like Mike Evans, who he's going to get 1,000 yards, but again, that receiving room is so loaded. If Goblin comes back healthy, Emeka Egbuka coming up, McMillan being there as well, like, what do you do with Mike Evans, who, statistically, he's going to be really good. He's obviously one of the top 10 talent-wise wide receivers in the NFL. I think another guy that's very similar, kind of different situation, would be a guy like A.J. Brown, who's in a good receiving room, but they're on a run first team in Philly. So what would you do with guys like Evans and Brown when you're looking at their draft and when to take them?
Now, Mike Evans and A.J. Brown might be the most talented receivers that are going later in the fantasy drafts. Mike Evans, though, I think you could just bank on 1,000 yards a season. We saw final week, the Bucs are getting him 1,000 yards. So he's one of the most locks for, even though I don't know how much he's going to be week to week with that loaded room, he's still going to get 1,000 yards. I think that's a lock, a guarantee. He's a very good red zone threat because he's tall and could get those jump balls. And A.J. Brown, I think he's the only receiver I would take on the Eagles just because Saquon's really good. Jalen Hurts is really good running in the red zone. But A.J. Brown is still one of the most talented receivers. And I think that team is still good enough that if they're not winning by 14 at least, and they're throwing the ball, it's probably going to go to A.J. Brown. Devontae Smith is a guy who I think is really good, just probably not going to be able to rely on every week. But A.J. Brown, Mike Evans, two of the, older or like average age guys, just they're not rising, so they're not super fun to pick, but they're probably going to be the same statistically that they were last season and the year before that because they're consistent stars in the league. Those are probably two guys people sleep on. You could probably get late just because of the nature of their receiving rooms and the fact they're older, not as fun and flashy as some of these young guys.
Yeah, I do want to say A.J. Brown did it. His social media tag is 1K always open. He's got 1,000 yards every year except one where he only played like 10 games because he got hurt. So I like A.J. Brown. I think he's hilarious. He's so funny when you hear him talk. When he's talking about the Lombardi Trophy being not loyal, man, he's a treat. He is a character, is A.J. Brown. So, yeah, but I didn't want us to get on A.J. Brown's bad side because if A.J. Brown somehow is watching this and he would hear that we're talking about Mike Evans always being 1,000 yards and not him, he would let us know about it, Chris. I guarantee you that. But now we'll move to the last position, which would be tight ends.
Well, first of all, Mike Evans has done a lot more, but yes, A.J. Brown, respect to you. Tight ends, I think tight ends, I would not even take a tight end unless you get Trey McBride or Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers now has a quarterback that can throw him the football competently, so he should on paper be better. I think his season was so good, he might be around the same actual output, but Brock Bowers, primed for a great opportunity. And then Trey McBride, we talked about him. Trey McBride does not really score touchdowns, yet he was the second best fantasy tight end last year. If he does score touchdowns, he will definitely be the top tight end in fantasy next season. Those two guys, you get them, great. A guy like Sam Laporta I had last year, baking from his rookie season, he was so good. Then his last season, a lot of mouths to feed, and if he doesn't get the touchdowns, not nearly the same guy at all. So I think Laporta, who's really good, Goddard, who's good, Travis Kelce, who's a great name but older, those guys, even Kittle, who's really, really good some years but inconsistent. Everyone has their own problems and own question marks around them. Take them all later and just if you don't get Trey McBride or you don't get Brock Bowers, wait. But if you're in the third round or late second round and you see Trey McBride, I would take a swing and get him, but then you have to get a running back, though, with two of your top 4 picks. And then after that, you're just going to be maybe weaker at receiver or quarterback, but you would have a clear position advantage every week at the tight end spot.
So I'll start with this guy. What would you do with a guy like TJ Hawkinson, who you didn't mention, but he's in Minnesota? You mentioned you were concerned about Jettas with the new quarterback, but Hawkinson, if you're talking about a new quarterback, JJ McCarthy comes from the Harbaugh system where he likes to use tight ends. He's used to throwing to tight ends. I'm sure they're going to rely on the tight ends a lot more now because they're, just easy for young quarterbacks to get the ball to. So would you take where would you evaluate a TJ Hawkinson in a tight end room?
I think he'd be at the end of tier 2 of tight ends just because, as you said, he's a good option for a rookie QB, but we don't know about JJ McCarthy that much yet. We don't know. He's still coming off a big injury, so backup-wise, you might have to worry about that. And they do have Justin Jefferson. They have Jordan Addison missing the first 3 games of the season, but after those 3 games, they have 2 really good receivers, and they're going to want to run the ball a lot. I think Hawkinson's competent. I just think people know his name, so they might pick him. I'd probably stay away from him because there's a lot of questions, and he does have some injury concern as well.
And last, guys, this is probably more for your backup tight end position or depending how big your league is. But rooms like, let's say it's Buffalo, who has a good 2 tight end system. And then also you look at Pittsburgh now, they have Jonnu Smith and Pat Freiermuth. So, like, where would you evaluate teams that have multiple tight ends that are all productive, but at the same time, there's obviously concern there because you're playing multiple tight ends. The ball can only go so many places.
Yeah, I think you just only would take one, and it has to be the pass receiving one, obviously. Jonnu Smith with Arthur Smith on the Falcons, they had Kyle Pitts and Jonnu Smith, and Jonnu Smith was way better than him. I think Freiermuth's a good tight end, but Jonnu Smith is more of a better offensive, just pass-catching tight end. So I'd get him. I wouldn't get anyone else besides Jonnu on the Steelers, but him and the Dolphins might have been top tier, but now not on the Dolphins, has a huge fallback. And who was the other guy that you said, Adam?
I said about a guy like Dalton Kincaid in Buffalo when they have, other tight ends.
Dalton Kincaid, I think you could take. You could take Dalton Kincaid because he's young and he has improvement to be on the field more. I want to take Dawson Knox just because he really knows how much he's going to be playing. Kincaid I'd buy into, but last season was kind of disappointing, but maybe a good sleeper. Buffalo's always tough, though, because Josh Allen might always produce, but he tends to spread the ball around a lot, and it's not really one target since Stephon Diggs left.
And I guess since we mentioned Tyler Warren, what about a guy like Colston Loveland, who was the top tight end taken in the draft? He's with Caleb Williams, and Ben Johnson, comes from Laporta, loves to use those tight ends. So, and obviously if Ben Johnson is willing to take that pick with Colston Loveland, he has high hopes for a guy like Loveland. So how would you evaluate Colston Loveland here with Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams?
I'd just be afraid of banking on anyone who's catching passes from Caleb Williams. Last year, we thought, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, and the only one that was maybe an option was DJ Moore, but even he struggled week to week. So I would just be a little bit more cautious with him. I know, like you said, with the offensive coordinator and the coach, it's like, okay, they'll use a tight end, but we haven't really seen Caleb consistently feed a guy in fantasy. And I think Caleb's a really good quarterback. I just don't think we've seen it for fantasy purposes actually help anyone, unfortunately. So I think Tyler Warren you could take because they're destined to give him the ball any way they can. Whereas with Loveland, who really knows if Caleb's going to feed him the way that other guys get fed as at that tight end position.
Man, poor Caleb Williams. You're writing him off. He had one season to feed guys, Chris. You're writing him off after 1 year.
I would take a swing at a Tyler Warren or, maybe like a Jonnu Smith ahead of a rookie tight end with a second-year QB who statistically wasn't great last season for fantasy.
So I'm going to push back a little bit. Now, I love Tyler Warren, but you're telling me that you're betting on Anthony Richardson more than Caleb Williams to be able to get the tight end the ball?
No, but I'm saying that they're experimenting with where to put Tyler Warren, meaning they want to get him the ball. With Penn State, most of Tyler Warren's best plays weren't even him catching a ball. It was him lined up and then just jumping over the goal line, which they might do with him because he's done those things.
His best play was catching the ball. His best play was when he snapped it and mossed the guy at USC. Come on, Chris.
Sure, but he's done more. You see that Tyler Warren, they get him the ball creatively, and they could do that in Indianapolis. And I think if Daniel Jones is the quarterback, he does do a lot of dink and dimes. I think that'd work a lot better. And Anthony Richardson, I think he's probably not going to start the whole season. And if he does, it means he learned how to pass. So yeah, I like Tyler Warren as a more of a risk, but I would have a decent backup.
Yeah, I'm just saying, you're out here writing off Caleb Williams, but Anthony Richardson and Tyler Warren, I will say, I will make a nice bet. I think Tyler Warren will throw a touchdown pass this season. So fantasy owners be happy. I think Tyler Warren's going to throw a touchdown pass this season.
I think he will throw, catch, and run one in. So I think
I hope he catches one. I really hope he catches one.
Well, yes, I was including it. But I'm going to say I think he'll throw one and run one in. So both of those, and then obviously catching Adam. But yeah, actually, it'd be really funny if he didn't catch one, but he threw one and ran one in. But he's kind of, I'm not saying he's Taysom Hill, but in the sense of, I don't know how this guy will score points, but I know he will some weeks is kind of what you're banking out with Tyler Warren.
Yeah. I mean, he's really, really good. And the reason I say he's going to throw one, it's not just because I love him from Penn State. He was a high school quarterback, so he does have some quarterback instincts with a decent arm. But that's going to do it here for our fantasy podcast. Chris, anything you want to leave people with before maybe they're entering their fantasy drafts this week?
Draft Taysom Hill with your very last pick because the very last pick doesn't really matter, okay? But the Saints do not have a quarterback. There's a world where they just give up and they just start putting Taysom Hill out there all the time. And it's sad to think, but if he's listed at the tight end position, he's probably going to be in the top 10 tight end just because he does have some games where if you're like, oh, Tyler Shuck isn't playing because he's bad and Spencer Rattler isn't good, they might just give Taysom the ball a bunch just to run up the middle. And he has some games where he does win you weeks. Last season, he would have a 37-point game, and you're like, oh my God. So I think take a swing late in drafts. That's my point of saying that, but also Taysom Hill, my guy right there. Take him in your last pick because no one's going to take him.
I hope he's not your last pick because that means you took kicker and defense a little higher than most people would have. But, this is very interesting.
Defense, also one last rule or tip. Defense, I would honestly pick up and drop per week just depending on the matchup. Don't draft a defense early unless you're like, I need the Steelers defense,
And then what, last quick, we didn't talk about kickers. Are there any kickers you're buying into? Do you still trust Boswell? I mean, because now they have a better offense, so they might not be kicking as many field goals.
I do really like Boswell because weird things happen to Pittsburgh where they kick a lot. But honestly, last season was his only real season where he was letting it up. And week 1, he had 18 points of just kicking. So I think after that, it was more of a normal kicking season. Just some weeks were so absurd. Kicker, just pick one.
Cam Little, Jacksonville, best kicker in football. Dude's got a cannon of a leg.
Be careful, though, with Buffalo, because you think you have a good kicker, and then Tyler Bass, and it's 50 miles per hour winds, and then he can't kick a ball. So
Yeah. No, that's why we said Cam Little, Jacksonville. The weather's always nice in Duval County, Florida. Weather's always nice.
Well, I think they're playing in England, basically, this season anyways, so.
I think they only have one game in England this year. It's weird.
But that's their home field advantage, is in London. Or in England.
Well, yeah, but he kicks it really well in Florida. It doesn't mean they play well in Florida. He kicks it well in Florida.
Sure. I'm just saying
the wind's horrible in England.
The England Jaguars, as we call them.
Yeah, as we call them. They have a great record. You want to place a friendly wager here? You probably won't do it. That the Jags have a better record than the Saints this year?
Why would I do that? The Saints' upside is 4 wins.
I was just trying to steal a win here, man.
No.
You never know. The Jags only won 4 games last year. You never know.
I'm not banking it. I'm not putting any stock into the Saints this year.
Yeah, all right, that's going to do it here for the Fantasy Football Podcast. Again, if you haven't already, please subscribe to all our social medias at the Pain and Panic Podcast. Please like this video. Please subscribe, hit the bell to be notified whenever we post videos. Should be about twice a week here as we move through football season. For my co-host, Chris Reynolds, I am Adam Sheets, and thank you for listening to another episode of the Pain and Panic Podcast.